Good afternoon. I'm going to hit you with the traditional Aggie attention getter and greeting, which is howdy. Thank you guys for coming to this session this afternoon. Jeremy and I, along with Martin and Charlotte, have been working on this proposal. And this idea has kind of come out of a group of proposals revolving around the sustainability of development efforts within the FOLIO project. And so I'm going to give you a quick history lesson over the last, 6 months or so, because this work largely started after the DC summit, which, like I said, sprang forth into these three proposals. And then we'll let Jeremy get into the meat of the proposal that we have synthesized out of the prior three. So, one more thing before we get too much into it. This is a long session. I think this thing is set to let out at what, 350, is that right? But we're going to try to let out a little bit early because we have a workshop in the next session that will hopefully be helping to refine some of these ideas and get us to a kind of a final version of this. So it's going to be in a different room. Do you remember which one it is, Jeremy? Shawnee. Okay. So we will proceed. Those of you interested in workshopping this with us, if you would follow us down to Shawnee so we can continue with the workshop portion, that'd be awesome. Yeah. Okay. And yes, we will be prepping for the workshop a little bit at the tail end of this one. So we'll kind of give you a preview of what the workshop's going to look like and what kind of questions we're going to be trying to answer. Okay. So let's get started with the history. So there were three initial proposals for kind of reimagining the development model for FOLIO. Right now, we know that primary development, like 99% of it probably is done by our commercial partners. And that development largely comes out of issues that we identify through the various councils and SIGs. However, we feel like to make this project more sustainable and open to community development efforts, there needs to be a process by which people can participate as a community or in the community for identifying development priorities and then funding and executing on them. So we talked about this at the DC Summit. We talked about money. We talked about how this might work for our commercial partners and how it would work for the community. And out of that sprang two other documents. So we're going to briefly go over all three. So the first one is the blueprint. That's the one that directly came out of the DC Summit. We had a updated vision statement, which you can find on the website under the About Us section. There were some AWS funding requests that were made for short-term viability. There was a long-term operations model that was identified that we needed to work on. And there was talk around an active developer marketplace. And if you look here in this area, talking about application definitions as being plugging into that marketplace, right? So already we're starting to see how the Eureka changes were starting to affect the way conversations were occurring around development. So out of that came another proposal, largely written by Mike Gorell of Index Data, but there were several of us who kind of helped him refine and present to the various councils. There was the idea of this developer marketplace. And I'm not going to go over all these concepts in detail, but just so that we kind of hit the high points. There was a points-based system for identifying work and assigning that work a value that could be basically assigned to different funding pools so that a development, I think the developer index was like 100 points equals 1 FTE. It was just so there could be a standardized way of looking at development effort across all of the FOLIO components. And then the governance structure proposed was a new committee that would work on identifying opportunities for alignment and basically creating the MOUs that would eventually kick off the work. And then the last one was a kind of an alternative proposal that was written by Jeremy. And I think he just made it 7 steps so he could call it a 7-layer dip. We all like 7-layer dip. And so these are the basic steps in that process. It was largely process focused. It wasn't heavily focused around governance or around funding, although it did mention those things, right? It was just more process focused. So all of these 3 proposals had overlapping areas of concern, and in some cases, call it a synergistic view on how to solve some of these problems. They may have not proposed exactly the same solution, but they were talking about them in the same way. So we felt like there was an opportunity to synthesize a framework that would incorporate all of the major ideas of these various documents into one coherent proposal that we could actually implement. So with that all being said, and without further ado, I will turn it over to Jeremy.
Howdy, folks. Yeah, so like Stephen said, we were aiming for one coherent framework. What you got instead was the CDD framework, which I'm about to explain. Yeah, so we worked on it for it's one of the reasons why maybe you're hearing about this for the first time and just a little bit before WOLFcon is because we really pulled this together very shortly before WOLFcon. Both Stephen and I and Charlotte and Martin, along with Jen and Maccabee, I think that makes all of us, are all members of a tri-council, a community-directed development working group, and that's kind of where these conversations were held initially. So I'm going to just dive in. If any of y'all have looked at the document, it's so long. I'm so sorry. It's 17 pages long. Hopefully, it'll be something we can all digest here together as we go over it. So what we tried to do is look at the entire problem in basically 4 large buckets. And you see them up here on the screen. It's funding, governance, communication, and process. It seemed to us that once you divided it up like that, that most of the things from the initial 3 proposals kind of sorted out into those areas. I'm going to say that we didn't pull everything forward, but we definitely pulled a lot. You'll see a lot of familiar concepts if you're familiar with the first 3 proposals, and we added a few more things to try to make things cohesive. So when it comes to funding, I want to say that one of the reasons why I think community-directed development has been a difficult thing to get started is because the truth is that it takes money to develop things. And we have built a very large system that takes a lot of resources in order to expand and support. And so I think we all felt the need as a community. I mean, this is obvious from all the proposals that are out there. We've all felt the need to kind of put our hand at least on the plow of development, but it was a difficult ask because it would take just a lot of resources, and just to speak plainly, those resources just aren't there in our community. So very much following on a lot of the ideas in the blueprint document and in Mike's document as well, we decided to kind of articulate some plausible funding sources for pursuing development. So you see here we have pooled funding. The idea would be that this would be some percentage of membership fees to be determined by the community council, set aside solely for the purpose of supporting community-directed development. I suppose other possible funding sources to fill that fund would be, I don't know, like maybe grants, in-kind contributions. I know that is part of membership MOUs also. So there's a couple different things that could end up translating into the pooled fund. But the idea is once those funds are amassed, they're earmarked or set aside just for the general purpose of supporting development. Next one on there is directed funding. The idea behind this is that there might be funds or resources that individual organizations have that they would like to see put towards a very specific development effort. So as opposed to just feeding money into the FOLIO organization and having that collect up in this kind of general use fund. This is something that gets earmarked for a predetermined purpose. We envision those being negotiated between the individual organizations and the FOLIO org via MOUs, and they're part of the DIP process. We are familiar with in-kind contributions. We definitely want to make sure that we have a system that is ready to receive those kind of contributions. They've taken the shape over time of FTEs, either acting as product owners or developers, but also infrastructure. That's been a lot of the folks participating in our community have donated up compute for the purpose of seeing FOLIO development happen. So, and then we also are recommending that specific funds be set aside to fund a set of full-time employees that are employed by the FOLIO organization to make up a community development team. There's one off to the side over there with an asterisk. It's independent funding. This is what we're calling basically everything that has happened so far when it comes to funding in FOLIO. And this is just people who have some resources directly interfacing with contractors to get some work done. And the reason it's on here with an asterisk is because we do not envision this idea replacing that model at all. We see these as things that can work right alongside each other, and I think it would be silly for us to trade in on something that has gotten us to this point, and really there's nothing we could do to prohibit that from going on in the first place anyway. So only to say we envision that continuing, but it's outside of the scope of this framework. So that's why that's over there. All right, so you saw all sorts of different kinds of funding, from potentially different sources. It seemed useful to kind of borrow from this abstraction idea that Mike brought on board with his contribution network to kind of normalize the concept of resource, in-kind resource, monetary resources from different locations, by introducing these ideas here. So we have kind of we've envisioned this almost like an economy for community directed development. We envision all of those funding sources to be translated into this concept of a community resource point, CRPs. Similarly, we also envision the work that needs to be done being described as either support score or development score. And so a support score represents the number of community resource points necessary to support a specific application. The development score represents the number of community resource points necessary to accomplish a certain development goal. So these ideas are going to feature heavily in what comes next. Okay. All right. I'm the type of person who's not afraid to quote myself, so that's what's happening here. All right. The inclusion of a piece of software in any component or module of FOLIO is an implicit commitment of resources. So I feel pretty confident about that statement. I think it's something that we're learning over time. We have said, yes, we would like FOLIO to have this, and yes, we would like it to have that. And the truth is every time we say yes to something, we are committing future resources towards that. And we might have been, it's possible, doing that without accounting for all of those resources. And I do kind of feel like the reason why, as a community, we are talking about these ideas so much is because we're starting to realize that we've created something that we now have to take care of. And, it's time for us to start embracing some concepts that allow us to be accountable for the things that we have created. So I have a question. And spoiler, the next slide has the answer, but feel free to shout something out. I don't know. How do you effectively manage finite resources across multiple spending goals? Any ideas? All right. The answer is you prioritize your goals. That's a great way to approach that problem. If you don't prioritize your goals, you end up spreading those finite resources so thin potentially as to make them useless. And I know we don't want to see that happen. So we strongly feel that in order for this whole concept to work, that we have to start coming up with mechanisms for prioritizing how we're going to engage with development. It is our recommendation that the governance of FOLIO engage in an exercise to categorize all of, and I'm calling them components because I really want it to avoid the word like module or application. I think there's a lot to figure out there, but to not get distracted into that, we're just going to call them components, the things, the software, the tools that make up FOLIO. We're recommending that these get broken down into 3 big buckets: core components, community components, and participating components. So a core component is any module, application, or framework that forms the platform of FOLIO. These are like base level things that everything else is dependent on. We envision these as being technically defined. We're going to, if we move forward with this, we're going to lean heavily on the technical council to come up with a definition of what a core component is. The idea is that every core component is going to be allocated a support score. That is the amount of resources necessary to support that component in a given development cycle. And a core component must have its support score covered by available CRPs. That's the idea. So once we identify the core of the system, we're saying we have got to, from the top of whatever resources we have to make sure that we're supporting the things that are fundamental to the system. The next bucket is community components. We envision these as being components that are central to the operation and identity of FOLIO. And we acknowledge the fact that this is a pretty subjective thing. So whereas the core components we see as being defined technically, we see this as being like unabashedly subjective. It is something that we see being defined by the product council through consensus. Also, there's been some debate about this back and forth, but I feel pretty comfortable saying that the support score for community components also needs to be covered. The distinction is that they are subjectively defined as opposed to technically defined, and that they are the components in the system that are eligible for basically participating with the community development framework. What that means is that in a given development cycle, we're earmarking some aspects of FOLIO, some components of FOLIO to receive development attention from the community. It doesn't mean that that's all that can get developed on. It's just saying we have these funds. We are intending to use these funds for across this subset of modules. And then the last section is participating modules. That would be by default everything else. We don't consider these things any less a part of FOLIO, but these components are not prioritized for development, funded through the CDDF for a given fiscal cycle. Now, I feel compelled to answer some questions, even though it's not time for that, but can I clarify anything for anyone? And I have a mic right here. Sorry,
Oh, sorry.
You read the confused look on my face.
Yeah, I see a lot of wide eyes staring this way.
Are you able to give a concrete example for each of these?
Oh, sure. Yeah. All right. So I would say that in the context of the Eureka system, we have these manager modules. Those would definitely be core modules. I don't know what definition the technical council might come up with, but I'm bold enough to say if they come up with a definition that doesn't include one of those manager models, they did it wrong.
Or how about something like Kafka?
Sure. Yeah.
That's core.
Yeah. And then for community, like I said, that's pretty subjective, but circulation, like I could see that, things that there are certainly some like, this is something that we want to focus on. And then, all right, I'll throw myself under the bus. Texas A&M is working on very slowly a workflow module. If maybe that is just a participating module. So, you bet.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'd like to comment that this is a very good approach, in my opinion, and provide some clarification as to how to prioritize work that will be given to the community. My question is about the community component operation. You said operation, and is that hosting hosting development environments, or what do you mean by operation here? Or is it hosting polio production?
Yeah, so I do not, yeah, that's a great point. I do not intend the word operation there to be indicative of like sysops or something like that. I mean that more just in like business operations.
Thanks, Jeremy. So we've been accustomed to think of the core of Folio as being a functional core, and it sounds like you're using the word core in a different way here.
Yes, and I do think that the core elements. Sorry, did you have more to your question?
No, that was really it. So we're actually, because we've talked about like, oh, well, you know, inventory, for example, or users is core, but it's not in this model.
It could be. Like I said, I do want the community to actively engage in the exercise to figure out these boundaries. So I don't know. I mean, under the application approach, the flow of dependencies is probably not going to. Basically, I think if you ask yourself the question, you can't run Folio without this thing, then there's a good chance it might be core.
Okay, because that was the other question I had, which was determining the scope of Folio as a product is not the domain of the technical council.
Yes, so that is
Right.
actually probably more the community bucket for, though I do want to say that I do not necessarily see this category as being something that's statically defined. I do see it as being kind of a fuzzy boundary over time. It is kind of like this is where we are leaning into for attention for this period of time.
All right, so forgive me, Jeremy. I think I might be blurring the lines on the different proposals. I've gotten them confused, but
That's understandable.
is there a correspondence of eligibility for maintenance chargebacks to the different tiers here? Was that in this proposal or a different proposal?
Are you talking about the pass-through funding?
Yeah, like
That is one of the things that we envisioned filling up the development pool. What do we call it? Oh, that's way too far back. The pooled funding. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, to some extent, the way that those funds get filled up, we are hoping that the community council will just, really get to work on that and figure out how to find those monies, either by reducing overhead or introducing, some new avenues to bring money into the project. This framework more talks about what to do with the funds once they're here, like how they should be divided up and how they should move through our community. I am going to move on because I got to tell you, there's a lot more.
Maybe just one.
Yes, just one, but only because it's you, Mark.
Thank you. So if I understand correctly, so you're basically looking at the architecture of Folio and you're trying to break up the different layers of Folio and decide how they will be funded. Right. So
yes, for a given fiscal cycle.
Right. So my question is really about the infrastructure that is needed to support each of those. So core platform, the funding model here would refer to hiring development resources, right? But there is also infrastructure that needs to be maintained and supported.
So the reason I use the word component was to be broad enough in order to include things like infrastructure. Yeah. All right. New governance roles. So essentially what it would mean for this to be adopted would be for us to convince all three of the councils to take on a new set of responsibilities, not necessarily to get rid of responsibilities, but to embrace saying we are going to do this thing. So let's just talk about what those things are. So the community council would need to evaluate CRPs. So they need to look at the funds that are available, and they need to figure out how to translate those into these this abstract concept that can kind of fuel this system. They need to allocate community development pool. So they're basically looking to figure out how much of the money that the FOLIO organization has is going to be set aside for these purposes. They need to fund the community development team, and they need to provide the product council with a budget for these CRPs. This is what you have to play with for this fiscal cycle. The technical council needs to identify the core components. I highly recommend that they come up with like an algorithmic approach to this. That's just kind of based on an analysis of things, and then maybe allow for some kind of I'll leave it at that. They need to apply support scores. Again, I think that should be done in an algorithmic way, and maybe have an appeals process if the algorithm gets it wrong, something along those lines. Define technical standards for community and core components. This taps into the concept of the TCR, but maybe the TCR can have different levels depending on which bucket you're dealing with. And then engage in the DIP process, which is something that y'all saw earlier on from the original proposals that it's been tweaked a little bit, but it has been pulled forward into this framework. The product council needs to select the community components, engage in the DIP process, and publish community priorities. Okay, so this picture is supposed to illustrate basically everything I've talked about so far. You have multiple funding sources. These funding sources are budgeted by the community council, converted into community resource points. The product council is responsible for spending those points against support scores or development scores, which are essentially priced by the technical council. So each one of the councils has these broad goals of budgeting, spending, and pricing. Okay. We are recommending the introduction or embracing of several community tools for allowing for the concepts and processes that we're wanting to see started to be communicated out effectively to the community. The first is a community priorities dashboard, which will be managed by the PC. It surfaces top SIG priorities, and as some of y'all I'm sure have seen, an example of this already exists. So we see this as featuring prominently in this process. We also would like to embrace the idea of a developer marketplace, and this is a way to identify qualified development partners designed around self-reporting and community validation, and participation in this marketplace implies a participation with the standards and processes of the community-directed development framework. So there's going to be a set of expectations, and if somebody throws their name down on that dashboard, they're implicitly saying we plan on engaging in development in the way that you have described. An implication of that is like participation with the TCR process, or something along those lines. And then also a dashboard to track development initiative proposals in flight. This is a central transparent view of all DIPs. It will be the point of management for the DIP process. And when a DIP is in process, there is stages, as you will see as we go over that process, stages where they can receive direct funding. So it also can serve as an advertisement place for specific proposed work to gather funding if other people are interested in seeing that work take place. All right, the DIP process is the primary mechanism of the CDD framework. So this is kind of the nuts and bolts of how it moves on. Everything up to this point is kind of the setup. And then this would be how things would work. I apologize. These are the next two slides. This one and the next one, worst slides I've ever made in my entire life. This is miserable. The DIP process starts off with an initial expression of interest, which is just the creation of a new DIP on the dashboard. It's at that point can be pretty lightweight. It's just kind of a working title, proposing the work that needs to be done. Maybe proposing as a coordinator to be a liaison for that work as it moves through the process, listing out preliminary stakeholders. Next, it will enter into a stage of iterative refinement. So what happens here is the councils engage with, specifically the technical and product councils engage with the DIP in order to make sure that it gets refined in all the necessary ways. That the specifications on it are actionable, that it's been attached to any relevant JIRA artifact. So if it's relevant to a certain UX prod direction, we want to make sure that those are associated. We want to encourage as accurate as possible estimates on development scores or impact on support scores that work might have. Once the DIP is in a healthy place, it will be submitted for approval by both the PC and TC. This is a slight variation for the initial DIP proposal, which included the CC, but we kind of feel like the CC's job is done once they have allocated the funds to get this work done, and that the product council and the technical council are probably the only ones who need to sign off on things at the very end. There's a lot here. Some of it is, you could probably guess at. One thing that I really want to draw your attention to is the last bullet point under product council, though this could probably be hoisted up a level. If a sufficient number of community resource points cannot be found, the DIP cannot be approved. So basically, it's just this, that we cannot approve work through the community development process if we can't pay for it. And that seems completely reasonable. Now, maybe I have another document that I'll give you all a link to. I don't think we have enough time to go through it today, but it goes through some scenarios for how this stuff could work. So just briefly, I'll stop here and talk through this, that it could be the case that that there's enough funds in the community pool of CRPs to just fund the work completely with the community resources. And if it's important enough to the product council, I suppose they could say, yes, yeah, we're gonna apply all these CRPs, and the thing could just move straight through. It could be that the product council only wants to fund half of it with those points. So that's what they do, at which point it would be on the people sponsoring this DIP to try to find other direct funding sources in order to essentially allow people to buy CRPs earmarked for that development process. So this is also something that was missing from the initial DIP proposal, is the idea of this hybrid model of funding, both from a community pool, but then also direct funding from people who are interested in seeing a specific set of work done. All right. Now, I think I know what you're going to say. Go for it, Mark. The question is two-part. Is there a time component to the DIP? And does it? What's the level of granularity of the work? Like, can the work be for any level of granularity, bug fixes? I would say, I'm going to answer the second part first. I think that it would be a mistake to limit the granularity on it. Though I have a feeling that the process will probably naturally kind of settle into like a certain scope, just because there is some overhead involved in this, and I don't know if it's going to be worth it for everything. You might see people maybe bundling up a bunch of smaller requests into a concerted effort. And then as far as the time component goes, we have not addressed that. I do think that is worth exploring, but it's not in the current proposal. Yes. It's not. Oh, I'll address what I thought you were going to ask. Well, Caitlin, and then.
And I've asked this before. How do we account for the differences between the estimated CRPs and the actuals?
Yeah, so this process definitely needs another iterative cycle here when it comes to, any contract that you sign, you're going to have to account for overages and things of that nature, right? So one of the big reasons why we're talking about this here right now with all of you wonderful, smart people is this idea needs iteration. Like we need to iterate on it, and we fully acknowledge that. I do think that we probably are going to want some boilerplate contracts for this kind of work, both on both sides, both on the MOU side and then also on the contract side, where we kind of think through some of those things. But I guess my short answer is if the liability lies with the contractor, then we need a contract that expresses that and makes that clear. And if the liability lies with us, then we are going to have to enter into another funding round. Where the product council either decides that they're going to commit more resource points towards it, or we look for funding, and worst case scenario, we can't find it, and it's a wash. Let's try to avoid that. Okay, yeah, go for it.
Did you think about like every organization has points to invest in to begin with, and then if you're taking on like the bulk of development or something like that, then you gain points that you can reuse afterwards.
Like gamifying the whole thing?
Not necessarily. I mean,
I like
because there are going to be cases where we just don't have enough points, right?
Yeah.
And we don't want to necessarily derail like two organizations that feel very strongly about going ahead and developing something.
Mm-hmm.
And then like, what is the role of the community to kind of say, hey, we got you. Like, we understand that you're investing now in like this stuff, we're going to use it.
Yeah.
But you want to have those organizations also get something out of it, like it may be future points or some sort of like something that, like not necessarily the equivalent of the point, but it may be like a fraction of like a development kind of future kind of something that you can do. Not necessarily gamifying.
Yeah, I feel like something like that is like version 2.0 of this. Like if we get the basics down, then like we can explore like those levels of like sophistication. I do think that the direct funding addresses essentially what you're saying, because as an institution, Texas A&M has funds, and as long as we have a mechanism for Texas A&M to turn those funds into CRP points at will, then we kind of are sitting on a bucket of points, in a sense. Wayne, all right, actually, I'm sorry, I gotta keep moving. After what no one asked and I thought y'all were going to ask is, why does the RFP step come after we have allocated funds? I gave the analogy the other day, or maybe I was talking to someone and like, this is like a situation where someone knocks on your door and says, I want to pressure wash your driveway. And you're like, well, I only have $1,000. And they're like, guess what? I charge $1,000 to pressure wash driveways, And I feel like that's kind of what will happen to some extent here. This is not actually so different from Mike's proposal, though, which proposed standardized rates when it came to participating as developers in the developer marketplace, which another thing I want to point out here is that the developers who are eligible to receive the community resource point funding have to be selected from the developer marketplace. So we are limiting ourselves to interfacing with developers that have agreed to kind of engage in this process by signing up on that dashboard. So I think there's room for discussion there. The sequence does feel odd to me, but I don't necessarily think it's not workable. And I kind of like the idea of us as a community deciding how much we can pay for something and just seeing if there's any takers out there for it. I'm going to move on because we've got so much stuff to go through. No, that's it? Really? Oh, okay. Well, no, it's not. It's not it. It's it for my section. Wayne, what was your question?
So this is a really well thought out and complete process for trying to manage the software development lifecycle for a contribution that, in using this process. to what extent or how do you see independently funded contributions starting to follow a process like this? Because when Index Data makes a module on behalf of a customer, does Folio own it now? And so that's kind of what I'm asking.
So I think that we do have a carrot here, and it is that pool of funding, right? So if the money's there, like if we are able to get some money together and actually see it moving through the community in this way, and you have an opportunity to pay for something outright all by yourself, or participate in this process and maybe get the product council to pitch in some of that money from the community funds, there's a motivation to participate with this process. Now, that doesn't mean, maybe you try the DIP process and you don't get any funding, and it doesn't, you don't see the interest in the community, but you're like, no, we really need this done. So you like close down your DIP and you say, all right, I'm just going to do this directly. Like, that's an option still. Now, as far as like who owns it, my understanding is that this process does not change that scenario at all, really, because currently, everybody who gets work done in Folio, or if you build a module from scratch, you have a decision to make whether or not you're putting this in the Folio org in GitHub or not. And I think that decision still exists under this paradigm. One thing I can say is if you don't put it in the Folio org, it's never going to be selected as a core or community module. So you're opting out of the system by doing that.
I have a comment. Even without the RFP process and the CRPs, I think it would be useful if we implemented the DIP for all development, just from the perspective of the product council, so we can start bringing some transparency earlier in the development process, and having that step where the community has an opportunity to comment and provide feedback, I think could be really critical and lead to a better product.
Well, thank you. I liked that. I like that comment. I see Sharon. Oh no, you have the mic. Yeah.
First off, the RFP. I'm on a citywide board, and it's very typical for us to outline our upper limit of our budget before we release the RFP, because
that makes me feel better also.
Yeah. But my other comment, and maybe it's a comment/question, is does this incentivize ongoing feature development, or do you envision companies and developers coming and saying, I want to pitch an idea that's all about maintenance?
One of the scenarios, full disclosure, there is going to be a slide with a QR code that links you to a document running through some scenarios. AI made that document. I just fed it all this stuff. I was like, make me some scenarios. They're pretty good. I found them very entertaining, minimal editing on my part. But one of the scenarios was a vendor looking at the priority dashboard and saying, you know what, I think we can do this. And they were the ones who started the DIP and said, we want to do this work. I find that to be a very interesting kind of angle on this that honestly I did not envision when we created it, but go AI, I guess. Yeah. ChatGPT put in a DIP and it wants to build something. No.
I'm just wondering about the governing organization for all of this. Is this under Open Library Foundation? Is it all Open Library Foundation?
It's Folio org.
Just Folio.
Folio org is the scope of this framework here. Now, there's implications of that with Folio org's relationship to OLF, and but this is proposed as being something that's managed through Folio org. I believe, yeah. Yeah,
could you ever envision it being all OLF?
Well, if we do this and it works and it's so awesome that other people want to adopt this approach, then yeah, let's do it. Let's roll it out worldwide.
Okay.
All right. Here's the deal. What time do we have? Where are we at? What time? Does anyone remember what time I said we absolutely had to stop the presentation portion of this? Yeah, that was my.
You've been doing it kind of along the way.
Okay. I'm going to steal Stephen's section here and just and then just pivot us right into Q&A so we can wrap these up. We do not envision this as being something smart to try to bite off all at once. We think that this definitely should be rolled out in a phased approach. We outlined a possible phased approach, but I think that what we outlined probably needs a lot of scrutiny and more thought. So I think we could probably leave it at that. We think it probably should start with a pilot that, basically just runs the DIP process, just on like one development effort, and then do some feedback, modify the process, and then if we like it, try to roll it out at a larger scale. So I think we can go to Q&A now. There we go. We're at Q&A. Go for it.
And I got 3 questions for the price of 1.
All right.
So one question is, and again, this is a great proposal. Thank you for putting the effort into doing that. I know that's not easy, so thank you. My first question is, how do other open source communities do that? Like in this morning's presentation, there were references to Fedora, Blacklight. How do they do it, and how does this compare to those?
So I can only, and maybe some of my other presenters might have other experience in this. I've been a part of multiple open source communities. FOLIO is by far the most organizationally sophisticated open source community that I've ever been a part of. Take that however you will. Yeah. Well, I just mean in that, like, a lot of the other open source communities that I've been a part of have been a little bit more. But I also have to say that the scope of the software that was being produced was. Questions online.
We do.
Okay.
There eventually.
Folio is a much more sophisticated piece of software than a lot of the software that was being developed in these other contexts. So I have personally never seen anything like this before, but I also have never been a part of an open source project that I think called for something like this.
Okay. My second question is, have we tried running the numbers? So is it going to be part of the pilot? For example, if we look back at the work that's been done, can we convert those estimates into the those points and see? In other words, can we retroactively try
like workshop it in a retrospective kind of way,
and then help us determine how much funding is needed?
I think that's such a good idea. I did actually start trying to run some numbers at some point in this process, and I can tell you the money's not there. Right? We can't even come close, given the money that is here currently. That said, I do think that it's not really fair to say that the money is not there. Where the money is committed currently does not leave enough extra to fund this. But I do think that there are a lot of really good ways of moving money around and encouraging an increased influx of funding that I'm optimistic that we can get there. But yeah,
Chat doesn't exist on this computer. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Sorry.
I just looked at the red blinking.
Can I butt in with another comment? I think. So one thing that's interesting to me is this proposal has a lot of really great and ambitious ideas, right? It is extremely complex and has a lot of dependencies also. So whenever we're talking about this, my question is always, what's the MVP? Like, what's the smallest valuable thing that we can implement? And in this conversation, one thing that's sticking out to me is that didn't jump out to me when I was reading the document. I would like to assert that even without an increased pot of community funding, having the DIP process that you illustrated would be a really useful way for even like in that independent funding stream for us to outline and cost out development before an institution does an RFP, or even like I can imagine an institution looking at Folio, wondering what the gaps are and what they might have to invest in order to adopt it, and having a really clear idea of what the costs are and exactly what they needed to do. And that would be so valuable.
Yeah. And if we were just, like we just said, we're just going to run the DIP process without the community funding for a year, we would gather a lot of useful information in that time that would help us. We have this question that echoes, Mark, your question from Larry. How does COA, the other OLF, ILS do this? I mean, the short answer I have is I don't know. Does anyone in the room know? Yes, Ian.
Control C, Control V.
My knowledge might be a little rusty. It's been a while since I've worked on Koha, but Bywater Solutions that's what we do a lot of. Koha does not have a sort of centralized funding structure quite like this. There are community funding pools that are set up so that when libraries determine, hey, we want to get this done, and we don't necessarily have the funding to hire one of the vendors in the space to build it for us, we can put it there, and then when enough libraries gather up funding, they can then be put out for someone to build. But there's nothing quite as structured as this within Koha.
I was a software developer for 10 years. That might factor into my approach to something like this, I think.
Can you say a little bit about how to cost that development? Like I know that can vary quite a bit, and it depends on.
Did you say how to cost out development?
Yeah. Like kind of, like in some cases, the use cases are going to be completely aligned with the strategy of the organization that is, and maybe it's going to be lower than another organization that need to kind of build that. How all of the, like, how do you imagine that those various costs, like going to be kind of normalized somehow in this kind of marketplace? Or?
I am not sure I understand your question.
Well, I think it's answered by the CRPs, right? A full-time developer is 100 points. Let's assume that's the index. And a full-time developer costs X amount of dollars for this fiscal year. And so we can index the number of points as a proportion of the however much an FTE costs, right? So we can kind of gauge cost by basically reevaluating what an FTE would cost for a developer for each year, for a given fiscal year.
Are you on the community council currently? Oh, well then you're asking the right question though. I think this is like question 1 for the community council is, well, maybe question 2, but after they find the money, then like how do we translate that into CRPs? Yes, we are. Yeah, we are going to have to. What I would recommend is, I think this gets to what Mark suggested. I think we would need to look at our history and just try. I mean, we're going to come up with one number that's going to be not right in every instance, if that makes sense, but right enough to maybe get the job done.
So I was just wondering, for us in institutions that just kind of have a basic FOLIO community membership, we don't have developers or anything at our institution, is the best way for us to be involved is through the SIGs, I guess. And so the SIGs on our behalf will send things to the, put on the community priorities dashboard. So that's kind of how it will work.
I think that I love that question because I do think it's always been an important thing in the FOLIO community to participate with the SIGs. But I think under this framework with the aid of the community priorities dashboard, it makes it even more important to engage with the SIGs, because I really think one of the things that Mike's contribution network pointed out that I do think transfers over into this framework is how important it is to have healthy signaling from the community as far as what development we need. And I think that this idea of the prioritization dashboard just, I mean, it nails that. And I think that, if you imagine all these components being in place, you'll be able to look at a snapshot and say, well, this is what the community wants, and this is what's happening. This is the development that's being, in process right now. And you can say, are these things matching up? If they're not, let's do better at that. And someone has the mic.
Hi, this is Kristen Martin. So I've been on some groups that have looked at some of these things previously. So it's good to see some of the same concepts. I don't know if we're reinventing them over and over again or if they're getting carried forward. There are some things that I see that are different with what you're doing. And then I'm thinking about dependencies. So some things that interest me is like when we had sort of come up with like the 3 layers of different types of what's the word you were using? Components, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So that's something that we have talked about before. I think what we were lacking was kind of this money issue. So one thing, like even aside from getting into a dip or whatnot, defining scores for how much it costs to support something, we have never done that. And
Yeah.
that's really of interest. And I would be really curious to see if we have enough money to support everything that we have right now. And I think the
yeah.
answer is probably not.
No.
But I do think if there is a process to actually do this, and that is a pretty big thing to do, that is really going to help people understand what, like, why should we be contributing to FOLIO, or what should we be contributing? And so even aside from future development work, I think that's a really fascinating and good direction to go in.
Thank you.
I actually have a comment about that. This is Stephen again, for those of you online. One of the themes that was applied at the DC Summit was this idea of growing up and moving out of the house. We've been on Dad's credit card for a while now, and it's time for us to start taking responsibility for the project a little bit more seriously. And so this idea of budgeting the CRPs and ensuring that all core componentry, the maintenance thereof, is funded from those CRPs first before any DIPs are considered, is a major step in that direction, because it makes us responsible, the community responsible, for the maintenance of those core components, so that the core of FOLIO will never be, kind of left aside or overlooked when it comes to what our development priorities are. The first thing is we have to take care of what we have, and then of course after that we can decide what we want to do with our resources.
I'm going to say that this is going to be the last question, though I love how much everyone is engaging with these ideas. Before the last question, I just want to pitch this. We have set aside the last part of this presentation to get to capture some feedback from you guys. So there's going to be a form that I'm going to ask y'all to fill out. I'll walk y'all through it step by step. But it'd be great if you guys could just throw some ideas out there. What I hope that will do is get you to think through a list of questions so you have your own personal answers in line. And then I would love for all of y'all to follow us over to the next session, where we could break up into groups and have short discussions about those answers that you just gave us in this room. And then you'll have an opportunity to report those back to everybody else. Because it would be great to kind of crowdsource this a little bit and hear from y'all what you're thinking. Like I said, this is kind of step one in I think a long journey if we decide to go down this way. So, yes. Yeah.
I wanted to move from the what to the how, and I don't know if that should be covered in the workshop. Specifically, my question is, the work that's going to be done by a development partner, who's going to verify it? Is, I come from a country where they say trust but verify.
Sure.
Once the work is received, I would assume it's somebody from the community that would be verifying the work, but then that's an additional commitment. Would that need to be taken into account when assigning the points to the work, or?
I think it would need to, like, since an FTE it translates ultimately to a CRP. I think that it's all right. We could get one more question. Yeah. So the work involved with verification, I think, would necessarily need to be covered by the resource cost to get the work done. It's an important stage in the development process, and you didn't do everything you needed to do if you skipped that stage. So we should pay for it. So the way that it's written here implies that when development work is done, it might have an impact on the support score of that component where the work was done. And that needs to be accounted for before the work is done. So if I add an entire new feature set, then that's something else that needs to be maintained. So maybe that's going to increase the support score by 50 points, or, it's funny money right now, but whatever. And so that needs to be accounted for ahead of time. If we don't have those 50 points in our budget, then it's like, well, I guess maybe we could pay for the work to be done, but we can't pay to maintain it after the work's done. So no, we can't afford to do that work.
So vendors can submit dips for maintenance, right?
According to ChatGPT, if we don't like that idea, we just say no, they can't. But there's nothing in here that says they can't.
Vendors submit dips. Vendors can submit dips.
Yes.
Okay, so it goes through the approval process and then it goes to RFP. So a vendor could submit a dip that another vendor could potentially get the RFP.
They could get scooped.
Contract.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a feeling, in general, I have been very impressed with how kind the Folio community has been. And since ultimately it is the product council deciding to, deciding who, to contract with, that would be a pretty shady thing to do, I think.
It bears, I think, some
scrutiny. Yeah. I have thought about that. It could get awkward. Okay.
I think that abuse of the process would, A, engender some ill will, and B, probably lead to a revision of the process to prevent that from happening. So I think there's incentives not to do that.
It's a good way to get rid of development partners, I think. Now, I mean, just because a vendor submits a dip doesn't mean that we need to, have the work done. And I suppose you could end up in a scenario where I don't know if we should create the process in such a way to absolutely disallow that, but maybe just have a cultural convention around that, maybe. I don't know. All right. So there's a form at the other end of this QR code. Let me explain how this is going to work. I introduced 4 different major components to this: funding, governance, communication, and process. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask you one question at a time, which we would like you to answer about each one of those 4 components. I got really cute in how I labeled out these questions. The first one is, what works well? So we're looking for a pat on the back. Like, when you look at this, what... Yes, thank you. Share my screen. Yes. Oh. Okay, let me see. I can do all these things. I need to share my screen, which means I need to pop up Zoom. Share. Nice. And then Control Alt Shift H. Yes. Slideshow. There we go. I think we have everything here. Okay. Yeah, so the first question that we're going to ask is what works well. And so we're just going to embrace the awkward silence, and I'm going to give you guys about 3 or 4 minutes to fill out that first page of the form, which should be, if everyone has it up, what works well, and you have a spot to fill it in for funding, governance, communication, and process. Is everything I'm saying tracking with what you guys are experiencing? No, sorry. Great point of clarification. This is when you're thinking about the CDDF, what do you think seems like what do we get right? Oh, you bet. Oh. All right, well, that's a failure of AI. I asked it for some recommendations for some good QR code generators, and I'll have to provide my feedback to ChatGPT. Yes. I'm going to give y'all about another minute. So those of y'all on phones, I apologize. Okay. I'd like to move us on to the next question. Same format, different question. So next question is, what needs work? So the way that Joseph framed this the other day, I think was really great, is why will this not work? What's gonna break here? I think we've already heard a lot of really great suggestions for areas for improvement. So on the next page, just kind of for each one of these categories, maybe try to identify something that needs a little bit more work or a lot more work. About another minute, we'll move on to the last question. All right. Last question is, what work is next? That's the most awkward of the three, but I want to stick with the theme of work. So, but idea is, what are the best next steps here, in y'all's opinion, in each one of these areas? All right, we're going to wrap things up. I can promise you that QR code will not work at this point. I will share this out in the chat, or actually, Stephen, would you mind sharing that out in the chat, the link? So this is just the scenarios document that I referenced before. If y'all want to read through some of those, I found them personally interesting. We have about 8 minutes till the end of the session, but I'm going to try to wrap up a little bit early because I want to plug the next session that we have. It is a workshop on this topic, right? So it's the end of the afternoon. It's a big ask. I'm feeling it. Like I'm tired. We've been talking about this a long time, but I really, really value the engagement of the community in these topics. So it would be awesome if you guys would follow us over to Shawnee and engage in a small group discussion on these same topics to kind of share the ideas that you just put down on paper with your colleagues and have an opportunity to kind of report them back to the room. And that brings us to the close of this presentation. And thanks, fellow presenters, and thank you all.